Senator Henry.
And thank you, Madam President, for allowing at some point for us to, we're allowed to express our condolences on behalf of the passing of Honorable Hassan James. And I'll do that shortly, but to speak briefly to the motion, to the bill that is before us. And of course, we join to support this bill, the amendments to the Immigration Act. But in addition to this, I would just like to share with you through you to this House, some brief comments on the general posture of our immigration policy. Madam President, it's my understanding that an immigration policy of any country should be underpinned by certain values, core values, and not just intellectual concepts. And of course, while we understand the need and we support the initiative for protection of our borders, an immigration policy has far-reaching implications for our country. And of course, we think of it in the context of who, whom, and how will our entire gambit of immigration policies and enactments benefit the population at large. And I would have seen it necessary at this juncture, at this appropriate time, for the government side to share with this House, maybe through the Minister for National Security, aspect of our immigration policies. And I speak to specifically two areas of concern that have been discussed. One in terms of our posture towards the country of Venezuela, as well as our posture towards the Chinese. Madam President, I would not suck my teeth if we continue to be treated on this side with a certain kind of disdain, but let it be. Madam President, I am currently in Dominica, assisting in the rebuilding effort, and there are, I dare say, hundreds of St. Lucians who are participating in the rebuilding effort. And it is an interesting task, Madam President. It is taking shape, but it needs so many persons to be part of the effort. For in one night, almost 200% of the country's GDP was wiped away. Middle class and all classes of persons were affected. On Wednesday, passing, Madam President, the Prime Minister of Dominica in his budget address cited that the government of Venezuela had, through their funds, were able to construct 155 new homes for Dominicans. And I thought that was quite interesting that while on Wednesday the Prime Minister of Dominica was sharing praise on Venezuela, that in our jurisdiction I heard that we had taken a posture with Venezuela to institute visa considerations. And I did ask myself the question, is there a regional harmonious approach in dealing with immigration as stipulated in this pieces of legislation? And why would one sister country have one approach to Venezuela while we adopt a different approach? And Madam President, let me tell you that I also have benefited while I'm supporting that through the exercise of the Venezuelan intervention in Dominica in rebuilding. I was able to foster and get almost 120 pieces of uniforms for the school children in the Castries Southeast constituency, which will be going directly to the schools. I will not be hand-picking individuals because I find the schools can target these individuals better. But I'm just saying that, Madam President, that while one country and the OECS nationals are benefiting in one way from the Venezuelans, that St. Lucia is adopting an immigration posture, and why the difference? In addition, I would like to ask, as I understand it, that the government have found it necessary to remove visa restrictions for Chinese. And I ask the question, what is the net benefit to this country? Why? Who are to benefit? Madam President, that particular initiative reminds me of two important stories. One is a very old story and the other one is recent. The old story is one of the children of Israel in Egypt, and the recent one is the Windrush people of the Caribbean who were being treated in a particular way by the UK officials. And of course, persons had to speak in their behalf because all of a sudden the nationals or persons who found themselves in Britain from 1948 had almost become aliens in their place of birth. And it happened in the Bible that Joseph, who was governor in Egypt, invited his brothers to settle there, and they stayed and they multiplied, and years after, Moses had to go down to free them because they were enslaved, because the new persons who were now on the throne of Egypt did not regard them as citizens but as a threat. When we're going to embark on our immigration policies, we need to ask ourselves, what are the far-reaching implications for our population? There's some questions that I ask. We use some cliches and we say to our nationals that instead of giving you a fish, we must teach you how to fish, which is good. But what about if foreigners come to St. Lucia and we give them the boat? I'm simply asking, our economic leverage and our patrimony and our heritage are for St. Lucians. And therefore, our immigration posture at all times must safeguard our population and our people. We should be concerned about our middle class, our local businesses, and those who are struggling at this time. And every effort we must make to have a harmonious immigration policy with our region, we must ensure that our population at all times are protected. So these are just a few questions surrounding our immigration, the government's immigration policy. I've read somewhere that the Minister for National Security in a statement said that Venezuela is still our friends. And I read it over and over, and I said, when your friend tells you, Madam President, that they're still your friend, you must ask why it's necessary to make that statement. What has happened? And when it's need to reassure ourselves of friendship, we ask what exactly has happened. We also remind ourselves, Madam President, that sometimes it seems unpopular to take certain positions and to have certain friends. But history will prove you, when you stand in times of difficulties with certain people, history will prove whether it was worthy of standing. Look today, Cuba. At some point in time, it was not very popular to be a friend of Cuba. And here we are today. The benefits and the so many professional doctors and engineers that persons have benefited from Cuba. So whatever the posture is, we must remember those very important stories. In 1948, the ship Windrush took Caribbean people. They went to England to rebuild after the war. But some people all of a sudden recognized, and they were threatened by their presence, and decided to detain them and send them back. Some of them didn't even know where they were going to. They only knew England as their home. The children of Israel, generations stayed in Egypt because of the famine there was in Canaan years ago when Joseph was there. They had to dig up the carcass of his tomb and had to leave Egypt under the guidance of Moses. In fact, the story of Moses started off by saying the new Pharaoh was on the throne, knew nothing of the goodness between the children of Israel and Egypt. So these important stories, both in Bible and in recent occurrence around us, the geopolitical scenes happening around us, are so important that it should guide our immigration posture to friends who are troubled. Yes, we must protect our borders. It's important we do so. Yes, we must always remember that we have friends who may need us at times, and we must also be a city of refuge for those who are in trouble. But also we must remember that we cannot supplant on our population first that we cannot manage. And more importantly, we must safeguard economic leverage for the people of St. Lucia. Thank you very much.